Hi, I'm Brooke, and my parents just looked me in the eye and told me to leave my house key, to take my suitcase and get out. They claimed that the house belonged to the family now. They had already packed my belongings, changed the locks, and replaced every single trace of me with their own things, acting as if I never existed. But what if I told you that wasn't even the worst part? What if the real betrayal didn't start at that dinner table, but years earlier? It began with small lies, subtle manipulation, and a plan so calculated it made me question every memory I thought was mine. Why would a family steal a home from their own daughter, and then try to erase her like she never even existed? The casserole had barely begun to cool when I stepped back from the stove, wiping my hands on a towel that still smelled like last summer's lavender. I'd been up since 6:00 a.m., scrubbing, folding, and arranging everything. Maybe I was overdoing it, but I wanted it to be perfect. This was my first real dinner as a homeowner. It was my first time hosting the people who had never truly believed I could stand on my own 2 feet. The table was set with Grandma's old china, the faded blue rims giving it that perfect touch of nostalgia. I had made name cards too. Nothing fancy, just printed and laminated at my office. I placed Arthur at the head of the table, Lillian to his right, and Melanie across from me. We sat there like we were at some soft-lit diplomatic summit, and not a family fractured by years of passive aggression. Arthur looked around my living room with a very strange expression. It wasn't pride, but a cold, calculating look that made my skin crawl. He didn't say a word about my achievement. He just watched me. I brought out the casserole, the steam rising in thick, fragrant clouds, and for a small moment, I felt a genuine surge of pride. This was my kitchen, in my house, purchased with my hard-earned savings. But Arthur did not even look at the food. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and began to ask me about my interest rate. He wanted to know the exact numbers, the amount of the down payment, and the specific duration of the loan. It felt less like a family celebration and more like a cold, financial audit. Lillian began moving my glass vases around, clicking her tongue in disapproval and claiming that the energy of the room was all wrong. Melanie just laughed, a sharp and unkind sound, and called my guest bedroom nothing more than a walk-in closet. Then, Arthur cleared his throat, and the entire room went silent. He looked at me with a heavy stare and said that the family had made a collective decision. He explained that since I was young and clearly inexperienced with such large responsibilities, it was better for the family to take over the deed. My heart stopped. I thought he was playing a cruel joke, but his face remained as hard as stone. Lillian reached into her leather purse and pulled out a set of keys that looked exactly like mine. She told me quite calmly that they had already moved some of their personal things into the basement earlier that day. They were not asking for my permission. Oh, they were simply informing me of how my life was going to be from now on. My sister Melanie just smirked, scrolling through her phone as if my entire world was not being dismantled right in front of me. I tried to speak, but the words felt like shards of broken glass in my throat. I told them that I paid for this house, that my name was the only one on the title, and that they had absolutely no right. Arthur just shook his head slowly, telling me that real family did not worry about legal titles, and that I should be deeply grateful for their guidance. It was at that exact moment I realized this was not a dinner. It was a calculated takeover. I laid the keys gently next to my untouched wine glass. No one said a word. Outside, the air bit colder than it should have for this time of year. I put the suitcase in my trunk, and I did not look back. I drove without a destination, the suitcase thumping in the back, with every turn like a heartbeat, trying to remind me what was real. Street lights blurred past, faceless houses glowing with a kind of comfort that now felt like mythology. When I finally stopped, it was at a gas station on the edge of town. The kind that still sold car fresheners and cheap coffee. I parked under the buzzing overhead light, my fingers trembling as I reached for my phone. It was buzzing with an unknown number, and something in me knew. This call was not from the past. It was from the part of my future they had not stolen yet. The call came just as I was about to open the car door. The phone buzzed against my thigh, an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. My thumb hovered before I answered, my voice low and flat. I said, "This is Brooke." The voice on the other end was too chipper for such a night. "Miss Brooke, this is Alexis from the mortgage department. I am calling to confirm some recent changes requested on your account." My stomach tightened. I asked, "What kind of changes?" "There was a request to add co-owners to your mortgage and to update the primary contact details. We flagged it because it did not come through the secure portal, and the information seemed inconsistent." I turned toward the windshield, one hand gripping the steering wheel. "I did not authorize any changes. I have not shared access with anyone." There was a pause. "That is what we thought. You are still listed as the sole legal owner. No co-owners, no power of attorney, nothing shared. We have locked the account for now." I swallowed hard and asked for the names they used. Arthur and Lillian. It was not the names that shocked me. It was how unsurprised I felt hearing them. I sat in the car, the engine idling as I pulled up the security application on my phone. My hands were shaking so much that I nearly dropped the device. I scrolled back through the footage from the last 2 weeks, and what I saw made the blood in my veins turn into ice. It was not just a sudden impulse. This had been planned. I saw Lillian and Arthur entering my home while I was at work, using a spare key I did not even know existed. They were not just visiting. They were measuring. I watched Arthur pointing at my furniture, making notes on a legal pad, while Lillian opened my closets and touched my clothes with a look of pure disdain. They had been in my sanctuary, invading my privacy, for 14 days before they ever sat down at that dinner table. On one recording, I heard Arthur tell Lillian that the spare bedroom would make a perfect office for his retirement hobbies. He spoke as if I were already gone, a ghost haunting a house that he had already decided was his. Then, I saw Melanie. She was there too, laughing as she tried on one of my favorite coats in front of the hallway mirror. They were a team. They were a wrecking crew dressed in Sunday clothes. I felt a wave of nausea hit me. I had spent years trying to earn their approval, thinking that if I just worked hard enough, if I just bought a house big enough, they would finally see me as an equal. But to them, I was just a placeholder. I was just the person who did the hard work of securing the loan, so that they could swoop in and claim the prize. I realized then that my parents did not love me. They loved the idea of what I could provide for them. I pulled into the parking lot of a budget motel on the outskirts of the city. The neon sign flickered, casting a harsh, rhythmic red light over the hood of my car. I sat there for 10 minutes, just breathing, trying to process the fact that I had been evicted from my own life. My phone was silent now, but the conversation with the bank employee, Alexis, was looping in my mind. They had tried to steal my house. Not just live in it, but own it. I walked into the lobby, paid for a room for 3 nights in cash, and dragged my single suitcase up the stairs. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap cleaner, a far cry from the lavender-scented sanctuary I had built for myself. I collapsed onto the bed, the thin sheets feeling like sandpaper against my skin. I did not cry at first. I was too exhausted for tears. Instead, I stared at the ceiling and thought about the years I spent working double shifts, skipping vacations, and saving every penny just to have a place that was mine. Arthur and Lillian had always looked down on my career, calling it a hobby, yet here they were, trying to harvest the fruits of my labor. My own mother had looked me in the eye and lied, while my father attempted to commit mortgage fraud. I realized that if I did not act quickly, they would find another way to bypass the security of the bank. I took out my laptop, my fingers hovering over the keys. I needed a lawyer. I needed someone who would not be moved by the family excuse that Arthur loved to use. I searched for the best property litigator in the area and found Samantha Reed. Her profile was intimidating, which was exactly what I needed. I wrote her a brief email, attached a screenshot of my deed, and told her I needed to reclaim my life. I was done being the quiet, submissive daughter. The next morning, at precisely 9:30, I stood outside the towering glass building in the city center. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. The office of Samantha Reed was quiet and smelled of old paper and expensive coffee. When she walked in, she did not look like the aggressive shark I had expected. Instead, she looked calm, methodical, and very, very sharp. I sat across from her and placed the original deed to my house on the polished mahogany desk. I also handed her my phone, which was already loaded with the security footage from the previous 14 days. Samantha did not say a word for several minutes. She just watched. She watched my father, Arthur, pointing at my walls as if he were an architect. She watched my mother, Lillian, going through my private drawers with a look of pure ownership. When she finally looked up, her eyes were like chips of blue ice. She asked me if I had ever signed any document giving them power of attorney or any form of shared ownership. I told her no. I told her that I had worked 60 hours a week for years to pay every single cent for that property. Samantha leaned back and tapped her silver pen against the desk. She told me that what they were doing was not just a simple family dispute. It was a clear combination of trespassing, attempted fraud, and illegal eviction. She said that in all her 15 years of legal practice, she had rarely seen parents so brazenly ignore the law in favor of their own twisted sense of entitlement. She told me that we were going to send a formal notice immediately. We were going to demand that they vacate the premises within 48 hours or face a full lawsuit. I felt a mixture of intense relief and absolute terror. I was finally fighting back, but I knew that once this letter arrived, there would be no turning back. The bridge would be burned, and I would be the one holding the match. The formal legal letter was delivered to the front door at 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning. I knew the exact second it arrived because my phone began to vibrate on the motel nightstand, and it did not stop for nearly 3 hours. First, there were the repeated calls from Arthur. His voice in the recorded messages was a jagged mixture of total disbelief and explosive, white-hot rage. He shouted that I was an ungrateful daughter and that I was destroying the entire foundation of the family over a simple misunderstanding. He said that he could not believe I would ever involve a legal stranger in our private family business. Then, the wave of text messages from Lillian started to arrive. Her tone was far more cold, dripping with the kind of calculated disappointment that had controlled my every move for my entire life. She asked me how I could possibly sleep at night, knowing that I was threatening to throw my own elderly parents out onto the street. She completely ignored the fact that they had already done that exact same thing to me just 2 days ago. She only spoke of her own pain and her own sense of betrayal. Even Melanie sent a short, sharp text, calling me a selfish person and claiming that I would regret this choice for the rest of my life. I sat on the edge of the motel bed and watched the screen light up again and again. For the first time in 20 years, their collective anger did not make me feel small or guilty. It made me feel cold and certain. I realized that they were not mourning a broken relationship. They were only mourning the loss of their control over my life. Samantha Reed had warned me that they would use every emotional weapon in their arsenal, and she was exactly right. I did not respond to any of them. I simply blocked their numbers and kept my eyes fixed on the 48-hour deadline. I looked at the single suitcase in the corner of the room, and I knew that very soon, the locks would be mine again. The 48-hour deadline arrived and passed without a single word of compliance from my family. Instead of packing their bags, Arthur and Lillian seemed to double down on their occupancy. Through the security camera on my phone, I watched as a large delivery truck arrived at my front door. 2 men began unloading heavy boxes and pieces of furniture that I recognized from my childhood home. They were not leaving. They were moving in permanently. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I did not call them to argue. I knew better now. I called Samantha Reed instead. She listened to my report with a calm, professional silence that helped steady my nerves. She told me that since they had ignored the formal notice, we would now proceed with the next phase of our plan. We were filing for an emergency injunction to remove them from the property. While Samantha handled the legal filings, I sat in my motel room and watched the screen as Melanie helped Lillian hang new curtains in my living room. They were acting as if the house had always been theirs, and I was merely a distant memory. It was surreal to watch them play house in the space I had worked so hard to create. Every time Lillian moved one of my books or adjusted a picture frame, I felt a sharp pang of violation. But beneath the hurt, a new feeling was growing. A cold, hard determination. I realized that the people on that screen were strangers to me now. They were not the parents who had raised me. They were intruders who were trying to dismantle my future. Samantha told me to stay away from the house for another 24 hours. She said that the law moved slowly, but when it arrived, it would be final. I closed the laptop and looked at my reflection in the motel mirror. I did not recognize the woman staring back at me, but I liked her much better than the one who had spent her life trying to please everyone but herself. I stood in the driveway of my own home, but it felt like I was standing on the surface of the distant moon. The familiar white siding and the dark blue shutters were exactly the same, but the atmosphere was heavy, with a tension that made it very hard to breathe. Beside me stood Samantha Reed, her briefcase held firmly at her side, and 2 sheriff deputies, whose presence made the situation undeniably real. We walked toward the front door, and through the large picture window I could see Lillian. She was laughing, holding a glass of wine, as if she were the queen of a castle that she had not built. When the first knock echoed through the quiet street, the laughter inside stopped abruptly. Arthur opened the door, his face shifting from annoyance to a mask of pale shock when he saw the uniforms. Samantha did not wait for him to speak. She stepped forward and handed him the official court order with a cold, professional precision. She told him that they had exactly 60 minutes to remove their personal belongings and vacate the premises, or they would be arrested for criminal trespassing. Arthur tried to bluster, his voice rising in that familiar, booming tone he used to silence me since I was a child. He started to say that this was a private family matter and that the police had no business on private property. But one of the deputies stepped forward, his hand resting near his belt, and told my father quite clearly that the property belonged to me and me alone. Lillian came to the door then, her face contorted with a mixture of fear and fury. She looked at me, her eyes searching for the daughter who used to apologize for things she did not do. But I did not look away. I stood my ground, my feet planted firmly on the porch I had paid for. I told them that the time for talking was over. Now, it was time for them to leave. The 60 minutes began like a slow-motion collapse. Arthur and Lillian did not move at first. They stood in the foyer, paralyzed by the sight of the legal documents and the stern faces of the deputies. But when the senior deputy checked his watch and reminded them that the clock was ticking, the panic finally set in. They began to scramble, grabbing the very boxes they had so triumphantly carried in only hours before. I stood by the kitchen island, my arms crossed, watching as the life they tried to build on top of mine was dismantled. Melanie was hysterical. She was crying about the unfairness of it all, calling me a monster for doing this to our parents. She grabbed a handful of my own towels, trying to stuff them into a suitcase, but Samantha Reed stepped forward and calmly told her to put them back. Everything that belonged to me stayed. Everything that belonged to them had to go. It was a chaotic and humiliating parade of cardboard and resentment. Arthur was sweating, his face a deep shade of purple, as he dragged his heavy recliner across my hardwood floors. He stopped for a moment, gasping for breath, and tried, one last time, to appeal to my guilt. He said that I was throwing away my heritage for a pile of bricks and mortar. I did not blink. I did not offer to help. I simply watched the second hand of the clock move. Every box that left the house felt like a weight being lifted from my chest. Lillian did not look at me at all. She moved like a ghost, her lips pressed into a thin, bitter line. She was silent, but her silence was no longer a weapon that could hurt me. When the final suitcase was zipped, and the last box was placed on the driveway, the 60 minutes were up. The house was empty of them, but full of the echoes of their betrayal. The sound of the heavy front door clicking shut echoed through the now silent hallway, like a final gavel strike in a long, exhausting trial. I stood there, for a very long time, just listening to the absence of their voices, the absence of their judgment, and the absence of their entitlement. The house felt larger now, breathing again, as if it had been holding its breath the entire time they were inside. I walked to the window and watched as the last tail light of the sheriff's car disappeared around the corner. They were gone. They were gone. Arthur, Lillian, and Melanie were truly gone. My hands were still shaking, but the fear was replaced by a strange, quiet clarity. I did not waste any time. I had already called a locksmith, and he was pulling into my driveway before the dust had even settled. I watched him work, the metallic clicking of the new tumblers sounding like music to my ears. He handed me the new keys, 5 of them, shiny and cold. I gripped them so hard, they left marks on my palm. I went from room to room, opening windows to let the stale air of their betrayal out and the cool evening breeze in. I found a stray earring of Melanie's on the floor and a cigar wrapper that belonged to Arthur on the coffee table. I did not get angry. I simply picked them up and dropped them into the trash can where they belonged. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I was not a daughter, a sister, or a disappointment. I was just a woman, in her own home, standing on ground that she had earned. I sat down on the floor, in the middle of my empty living room, and for the first time in days, I finally cried. But they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief. The silence was no longer heavy. It was mine. It was peaceful. And for the first time in my life, I knew that I was enough, exactly as I was. I had reclaimed my space, my peace, and my future. This was no longer just a house made of brick and wood. It was my sanctuary. I spent the next 4 hours scrubbing every surface of my kitchen as if I could wash away the lingering presence of Lillian and Arthur with enough bleach and determination. I took down the heavy floral curtains that my mother had hung, and I stuffed them into a large trash bag without a second thought. The bright, natural sunlight poured into the room once more, illuminating the dust motes, dancing in the air. As I worked, my laptop chimed on the counter. It was an email from Samantha Reed. She confirmed that the emergency injunction was now recorded, and that the sheriff office had established a patrol around my block for the next 72 hours. She also mentioned that the formal lawsuit for the attempted mortgage fraud was being prepared, and that Arthur and Lillian would be served with the papers by the end of the week. My heart did not race this time. It felt steady, like a clock ticking in an empty room. A few minutes later, another notification appeared. This one was from the fraud department at the bank. Alexis informed me that all of my accounts were now secured with multi-factor authentication, and that any attempt to access my mortgage details would require a physical appearance and a government-issued identification. I sat back on my heels, the smell of lemon cleaner filling my lungs, and I felt a profound sense of power. I was no longer a victim of their schemes or a pawn in their financial gains. I was the captain of this ship, and I had successfully navigated through the storm. I walked to the refrigerator and removed the name cards I had made for the dinner party. I tore them into tiny pieces and watched them disappear into the trash. The past was gone, and the future was finally, truly, mine. I sat in the middle of my quiet living room, the moonlight streaming through the windows I had recently polished. It was a strange, heavy sensation, being the only person with a key to my own life. My phone remained silent on the counter, a stark contrast to the digital storm that had raged only a few hours before. I knew Arthur and Lillian were likely sitting in their old living room right now, spinning a narrative where they were the victims, and I was the heartless villain. It was their specialty, after all. They had spent years crafting a version of reality where my successes were communal family property, but my failures were strictly my own. But that reality was shattered now, and the pieces, they could never be glued back together. I received a short text message from a cousin, someone I had not spoken to in several years, asking why I was being so cruel to my parents. I did not reply. I did not feel the need to explain my boundaries to people who had never respected them in the first place. Samantha Reed called me later that evening, her voice calm and steady through the speaker. She told me that the lawsuit was moving forward exactly as planned. Arthur had tried to call her office twice, claiming that the mortgage changes were just a simple misunderstanding, but she had shut him down immediately. She reminded me that this was not about revenge, but about the total restoration of my peace. I was restoring the truth of who owned this house and who owned my future. I looked around at the walls, which were now free of the heavy, dark decorations my mother had tried to force upon me. The space was mine again. I realized that the house was not just a building. It was a physical manifestation of my hard-won independence. I was 28 years old, and for the first time in my existence, I felt like I was actually living my own life. The cost of this freedom was the loss of a family that never truly existed as I had imagined, but the gain was a version of myself that was no longer afraid to say no. I walked through the empty rooms. The silence no longer felt like a threat, but like a clean, white canvas. I realized that the house was not just a structure of wood and nails. It was a testament to my survival and my refusal to be erased. I spent the next 2 days meticulously removing every lingering trace of the intruder's presence. I scrubbed the floors until they shone like mirrors, and I repainted the guest room, choosing a soft, calming blue that was nothing like the aggressive colors Lillian had preferred. My phone remained silent, but I knew the peace was fragile. Samantha Reed had warned me that Arthur might try one last desperate move before the court date. He was a man who hated losing, and he hated being ignored even more. I decided to install a secondary security system, one that included motion sensors and high-definition cameras at every entrance. I wanted to make sure that if anyone stepped onto my porch, I would know about it the very second it happened. One evening, as I was sitting on my porch, drinking a cold glass of lemonade, I saw a familiar car drive slowly past my house. It was Melanie's silver sedan. She did not stop, but she slowed down just enough for me to see her face in the passenger window. She looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated venom. I did not wave. I did not hide. I simply sat there, and I looked back at her with a steady, unblinking gaze. I wanted her to know that I was not afraid anymore. I was the owner of this house, and I was the owner of my destiny. She eventually sped away, the tires screeching slightly against the pavement, but I did not let it ruin my evening. I just turned back to my book, and I enjoyed the quiet, cool air of the coming night. The following Monday, I discovered that the battle had moved from my front porch to the digital town square. I received a notification that my Aunt Sarah had tagged me in a lengthy post on a social media platform. I clicked on it, my heart sinking into my stomach, and I read a narrative that I barely recognized. Lillian had shared a photograph of herself and Arthur, looking tired and frail, sitting on a park bench with their suitcases. The caption, which was clearly written by Melanie, claimed that I had used a legal loophole to throw my elderly parents into the streets in the middle of a cold night. It painted me as a cold-hearted and power-hungry woman who valued a mortgage more than her own blood. Within 2 hours, there were over 50 comments from extended family members and old family friends. They called me a disgrace and a shame to the family name. One uncle even suggested that the house should be sold, and the profits split among everyone to make up for my cruelty. I sat at my kitchen table, the light from my phone screen casting a harsh glow on my face, and I felt a wave of old, familiar guilt trying to take hold. But then, I remembered the security footage. I remembered Arthur measuring my rooms while I was at work, and Lillian going through my private papers like a common thief. I realized that they were not just trying to get my house back, they were trying to destroy my reputation so that I would have nowhere else to go but back to them. I did not respond to the post. I did not type out a long defense or engage with the vitriol in the comments. Instead, I took a screenshot of the post and sent it directly to Samantha Reed. She replied within minutes, telling me to remain silent. She said that every lie they told online was just more evidence of their harassment and intent to cause emotional distress. I closed the app, and for the first time, their words did not have the power to make me cry. I was no longer the girl who needed their approval to feel worthy. I was a woman with a deed, and a lawyer, and a very bright future. The next morning, the atmosphere at my office was heavy and suffocating, as if the digital lies from the weekend had physically manifested in the hallways. I could feel the weight of 1,000 unspoken judgments as my colleagues looked away when I passed their desks. They had seen the post. They had seen the staged photograph of Arthur and Lillian, looking like fragile victims of a cruel daughter. By noon, I was called into the glass-walled office of my manager, Marcus. He looked uncomfortable, shifting in his leather chair as he gestured for me to sit down. He told me that the firm had received several anonymous emails and even a few phone calls questioning my integrity and my place in the company. My heart hammered in my chest, but I refused to let my hands shake. I told Marcus that what he was hearing was a malicious smear campaign designed to force me into giving up my legal rights to my own home. I explained that Samantha Reed was already handling the situation, and that every single allegation was a lie. Marcus sighed, telling me that while he valued my performance, the company could not afford a public relations nightmare. He did not fire me, but the warning was clear. I was on thin ice. As I walked back to my desk, I realized that Arthur and Lillian were not just trying to take my house anymore, they were trying to take my livelihood. They wanted me to be jobless and desperate, so that I would have no choice but to crawl back to them. I sat down, opened my laptop, and sent a message to Samantha. I told her that we needed to move faster. I was done waiting for the legal system to take its time. I was ready to end this, once and for all. The following Thursday, the situation reached a breaking point, and my professional life collided with my personal nightmare in the most public way possible. I was sitting at my desk, attempting to focus on a complex spreadsheet, when I heard a loud and aggressive commotion near the reception area. My heart dropped into my stomach because I knew that voice anywhere. It was Arthur. He was shouting, demanding to see his ungrateful daughter, and telling the security guards that I was a criminal who had stolen his retirement home. Marcus walked out of his office, his face pale with absolute embarrassment, as he signaled for the guards to intervene. I watched through the glass partition as my father was escorted out of the building, his face a mask of purple rage, still screaming that I would regret this betrayal. I did not wait for Marcus to come back to my desk to deliver another warning or a pink slip. I grabbed my purse, walked out through the back exit, and drove straight to the office of Samantha Reed. I told her that the harassment had crossed a line, and that I could no longer live in fear of the next public confrontation. Samantha nodded, her expression as cold as granite, and informed me that we were filing for a permanent restraining order immediately. She had also discovered something even more sinister. While digging through the older mortgage history, she found a document that Arthur had attempted to notarize nearly 3 years ago. It was a forged deed, a clumsy attempt to transfer the property to his name, before I had even finished paying off the first year of the loan. He had been planning this since the very beginning, waiting for the right moment to strike. The realization hit me like a physical blow, leaving me breathless in the quiet office. This was not a sudden act of greed. It was a long-term, calculated betrayal by the man who was supposed to protect me. Samantha told me that this forgery was the final nail in his legal coffin. We were going to court in 72 hours, and I knew there would be no more room for mercy. The morning of the court hearing arrived with a heavy gray sky that seemed to reflect the gravity of the situation. I stood in the sterile, brightly lit hallway of the courthouse, my fingers tracing the cold surface of my briefcase, while Samantha Reed stood beside me like an immovable fortress of logic. When we entered the courtroom, the air felt thick with a tension that made it difficult to breathe. I saw Arthur and Lillian sitting at the far table, their faces set in expressions of practiced victimhood, while Melanie sat behind them, staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated coldness. We were called forward, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel the urge to shrink under the piercing gaze of my father. Samantha began by presenting the mountain of evidence we had gathered, including the security footage, the bank records, and the long history of digital harassment. But the true turning point came when she placed the forged deed on the bench of the judge. I watched the judge, a woman with sharp, discerning eyes, examine the document with a growing frown of disapproval. She asked the attorney of Arthur to explain the origin of the signature, and the resulting silence was more deafening than any shout could have been. My father tried to speak, his voice cracking as he attempted to claim it was all for the protection of the family, but the judge silenced him with a single sharp look. She spoke for 10 minutes about the sanctity of the law and the profound betrayal of parental trust. She granted the permanent restraining order immediately, and she ordered my parents to pay for every cent of my legal fees and the damages to my career. When she struck her gavel, the sound echoed through the room like a bell of liberation. I was no longer a daughter trapped in a cycle of abuse. I was a free woman, standing on her own ground. I stood in the center of my living room, and I listened to the silence. It was not the hollow silence of a house that had been robbed, but the full, rich silence of a sanctuary that had been reclaimed. I walked to the kitchen, and I poured the casserole that Arthur and Lillian had left behind into the trash. I did not do it with anger, but with a sense of finality. It was a cold and heavy weight that I was finally letting go of. I looked at the name cards I had made with such hope, and I realized that I had been trying to invite ghosts into my future. The people I thought were my family were merely shadows of the people I wanted them to be. I sat down, and I began to write a list of things I wanted for myself. Not for Arthur, and not for Lillian. I wanted things that would make me happy, rather than things that would simply make them proud. For 28 years, I had been a supporting character in their drama, but today I was finally the lead in my own story. I received one final email from Samantha Reed, confirming that the court order had been served and that the bank had finalized all security protocols. She reminded me that the road to healing is often long and winding, but that every step I took was now on my own ground. I walked to the window, and I watched the stars begin to appear in the velvet sky. I was alone, but I was not lonely. I was finally, truly, free. The house was mine. The key was mine, and the future was mine to write, one word at a time. I realized that the boundaries I had set were not meant to be a punishment for them, but a vital act of self-preservation for me. I was no longer afraid of their judgment, because their judgment no longer had a home in my heart. I breathed in the cool air, and I knew that this was the first day of the rest of my life. In the weeks that followed the court hearing, the silence was occasionally broken by the echoes of a family I no longer recognized. Arthur and Lillian had moved into a cramped two-bedroom apartment, a place they constantly described to anyone who would listen as a hovel forced upon them by their heartless daughter. The digital smear campaign did not stop. It simply shifted tone. My Aunt Linda, who had always been the peacemaker, called me one evening. Her voice was trembling as she begged me to reconsider, to at least pay for their rent as a gesture of goodwill. She said that family should not keep score, and that Arthur was an old man whose pride was his only possession. I listened to her, my hand gripping the phone, and I felt the old familiar pressure to cave in. But then I looked at the scar on my floor, where Arthur had dragged his chair, and I remembered the forged deed. I told Linda, quite calmly, that family should also not steal, and that respect is a two-way street that my parents had turned into a dead end. I told her that I would not be the bank for their retirement or the scapegoat for their failures. When she finally hung up, I felt a strange sense of peace. I was not just cutting off Arthur and Lillian. I was pruning the entire family tree of the people who valued tradition over truth. I realized that some bridges are meant to be burned to keep the wolves away. I walked to my front door and checked the new locks, the heavy metal feeling solid and secure. I was learning that being alone was a small price to pay for being safe. I sat down to dinner in my own house, and for the first time, I did not leave an empty chair for the ghosts of my past. The finality of the court order felt like a heavy stone being lifted from my shoulders and tossed into a deep, dark ocean. I walked through my hallway, and I did not see the ghosts of the disapproval of my family anymore. I saw potential. I saw a future that I could design without having to ask for permission or apologize for my existence. Samantha Reed had called me earlier that afternoon, her voice sounding lighter than I had ever heard it. She told me that Arthur and Lillian had finally signed the papers, acknowledging my sole ownership and agreeing to the no-contact order. It was over. The war that had lasted my entire life was finally over. I decided to celebrate by doing absolutely nothing. I sat in my garden and I watched the bees move from flower to flower, and I felt a connection to the world that I had never felt before. I was not just a daughter who had failed to meet an impossible standard. I was a woman who had succeeded in the most important task of all, saving herself. Melanie tried to send a message through a mutual friend, claiming that the family was broken because of me. But I knew the truth. The family was broken long before I bought this house. I was just the first one who was brave enough to stop trying to fix it. I realized that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of boundaries. I looked up at the sky, and for the first time in 28 years, I did not feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was home. I was safe. And I was finally, truly, free. The first morning that I woke up and did not feel a heavy knot of anxiety in my stomach was a Tuesday. I walked down the stairs, the wooden steps cool beneath my feet, and I realized that the air no longer carried the scent of the perfume used by Lillian or the stale cigar smoke of Arthur. It smelled like my coffee and the fresh rain from the night before. I stood in my kitchen, and for the first time I did not feel like a guest in my own life. I decided to host a small gathering, not a formal dinner with name cards and porcelain, but a simple brunch for the people who had actually stood by me. Samantha Reed was the first on my list, followed by a few friends from work who had reached out after the truth about the behavior of Arthur finally became public. When they arrived, the house was filled with a different kind of sound. It was the sound of genuine laughter and shared stories, and a warmth that did not come from a fireplace. I watched a friend sit in the chair where Arthur had once tried to intimidate me, and I felt a surge of quiet triumph. The house was being rewritten. Every new memory was a layer of paint over the old, dark stains of betrayal. We did not talk about the court case or the restraining order. We talked about the future. I realized that family is not something you are born into, but something you build with honesty and respect. As the sun began to set and my friends began to leave, I stood on the porch and waved. I was not alone, because I had finally learned how to be my own best advocate. The peace was not a temporary truce. It was my new foundation. My value was no longer up for debate, and my home was finally a place of rest instead of a battleground. It was mine. It has been several months since the gavel fell, and my life finally began to belong to me again. I sit on my porch now, watching the fireflies dance in the tall grass, and I feel a sense of profound stillness that I did not know existed. I used to think that family was an unbreakable bond, a sacred debt, that I would spend my entire life trying to repay. I was wrong. I have learned that family is not a one-way street, and it is certainly not a blank check for abuse or theft. Arthur and Lillian have finally stopped their digital assault, perhaps because they realized that their lies no longer have an audience that cares. Melanie has moved to a different city, and although she still sends the occasional cold message, I do not let it penetrate the walls of my sanctuary. I have realized that taking back this house was not just about the deed or the mortgage or the physical structure of brick and wood. It was about taking back my voice, my value, and the quiet strength I did not know I possessed. I have learned that you do not have to shout to be heard, and you do not have to win every argument to reclaim your worth. Sometimes simply standing your ground is the loudest and most honest truth there is. For 28 years, I allowed myself to be defined by the expectations of others, but no more. I am Brooke, and I am the sole author of the chapters yet to come. If you are listening to this and you feel like you are being overwritten in your own story, I hope you remember that it is never too late to draw that line. It is never too late to rebuild your foundation on the truth. Your peace is not a luxury. It is a necessity, and it is something that no one has the right to take from you. I stood in the center of my guest room, which was now painted a soft eggshell white, and I realized that the heavy weight of the expectations of Arthur and Lillian was finally truly gone. For decades, I had carried their disappointment like a physical burden, a constant reminder that I was never quite enough, no matter how hard I worked. But as I looked at the clean, bright walls of my own home, I knew that their judgment no longer had a place to land. I spent the afternoon organizing my books, placing each one on the shelves I had installed myself, and I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction with every click of a spine against the wood. I thought about the many times Lillian had tried to rearrange my life, from my clothes to my career, always claiming that she knew what was best for the family. But she did not know me. She did not know the woman who had stayed up until 3 a.m. to finish a project, or the woman who had saved every single penny to buy this piece of ground. Samantha Reed called me to let me know that the final injunction had been recorded at the county office, meaning that any further attempt by Arthur to claim the property would result in immediate legal consequences. I thanked her, my voice steady and clear, and I felt a profound sense of closure. I was no longer a daughter waiting for a father to be proud of her. I was a woman who was proud of herself. I walked out to the mailbox and found a postcard from a friend, and as I walked back up the driveway, I did not feel like I was trespassing on the territory of someone else. I was home. I was exactly where I was meant to be, and the silence was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. I stood on my porch as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the lawn that I had spent so many weekends tending to. It was a strange and beautiful realization that I no longer felt the need to look over my shoulder or check the security feed every 5 minutes. The bank had finalized the permanent locks on my financial accounts, and the legal battle with Arthur and Lillian was truly, finally, a closed chapter in a book I was ready to put on the shelf. I had learned, through the most painful process imaginable, that boundaries are not walls meant to keep people out, but gates that allow me to decide who is worthy of entering my life. For 28 years, I had been taught that family was a debt that could never be fully paid. But now I know that love without respect is simply a form of control. I walked back inside, the floorboards creaking under my feet in a way that felt like a familiar greeting, rather than a reminder of an intruder. I sat at my kitchen table, the very place where the betrayal had first been spoken aloud, and I felt nothing but a calm, steady peace. I realized that the people we love the most are often the ones who teach us the hardest lessons about self-worth. I did not need a formal apology from Lillian, or a confession from Arthur, to know that I had done the right thing. My home was no longer a house under siege. It was a sanctuary of my own making. I took a deep breath, the scent of fresh rain and lavender filling my lungs, and I knew that I was finally truly standing on my own ground. My value does not need to be explained. It just needs to be mine. And now, it is. The 26th day of my new life began with a quiet rain, the kind that washes the dust off the windows and makes everything look new. I found a small wooden box in the back of the hallway closet, something Lillian must have tucked away during her short and chaotic occupancy. Inside were old photographs of me as a child, standing between Arthur and Lillian at a summer carnival. In the picture, I was smiling. But as I looked closer, I could see the way Lillian was gripping my shoulder, just a little too tight, and the way Arthur was looking at the camera, as if he were presenting a trophy, rather than a daughter. I did not feel the sharp pang of grief that I would have felt 6 months ago. Instead, I felt a distant, cool pity for the girl in that photograph, who thought that love was something she had to earn with silence and obedience. I walked to the kitchen and placed the box on the counter. I realized that keeping these relics was like keeping a door unlocked for people who no longer had the right to enter. I took the photographs and placed them into a folder marked for storage, far away from the rooms where I actually live my life. Samantha Reed had told me that the final paperwork from the court would arrive by registered mail today. And as the mail truck pulled up to the curb, I felt a sense of completion that was as solid as the foundation of this house. I was 28 years old, and for the first time, I was not waiting for someone else to tell me that I was doing a good job. I was my own judge, and my verdict was that I had done exactly what was necessary to survive. I closed the door, locked it with my new key, and sat down to work in a house that finally, truly, belonged to me, and me alone. As the weeks turned into months, the atmosphere of my home shifted from a place of conflict to a quiet sanctuary of healing. I spent many evenings sitting on the back deck, listening to the crickets and the gentle rustle of the leaves, and I realized that I had finally stopped listening for the sound of a key in the lock. The fear that had been my constant companion for over 28 years had finally packed its bags and left. I received a letter from a distant relative, a second cousin named Marcus, whom I had not seen since I was 12 years old. He wrote to say that he had heard the stories Arthur and Lillian were telling at family reunions, but he wanted me to know that he did not believe them. He remembered how hard I had worked, even as a teenager, and he said that he was proud of me for standing up for myself. I held that letter in my hands for a long time, the paper feeling heavy with the weight of unexpected validation. It was a reminder that while some branches of the family tree were rotten, others were still capable of producing kindness. I did not write back immediately, because I was still learning how to exist in a world where I did not have to defend my every move. Samantha Reed had sent me the final invoice for her services, and as I signed the check for the last $1, I did not feel any regret about the cost. It was the best investment I had ever made in my own future. I walked to the mailbox, the air feeling crisp and clean, and I looked at the nameplate on my door. It was just my name, and for the first time in my life, that was more than enough. I was no longer a daughter defined by her parents, but a woman defined by her own strength. I woke up on the first Saturday of the new month, and I realized that the house no longer felt like a crime scene, but like a home that was finally and completely my own. I decided that today was the day. I would finally remove the last physical trace of the presence of Arthur and Lillian. In the corner of a dining room, there was an old heavy mirror that Arthur had insisted on hanging, claiming it gave the room a sense of dignity that it lacked. I took it down from the wall, and I was surprised at how light it felt, now that the weight of his expectations was no longer attached to it. I looked at the bare spot on the wallpaper, and I did not see a void. I saw a space that I could fill with whatever I chose. I spent the next 3 hours painting that wall a soft shade of sage green, a color that Lillian had once called boring and uninspired. As the paint dried, I felt a sense of quiet rebellion blooming in my chest. I received a phone call from Samantha Reed, who was checking in one last time to ensure that the peace was holding. I told her that for the first time in 28 years, I was not just surviving, but I was actually living. She laughed, a warm and genuine sound, and reminded me that the hardest part was over. I hung up the phone, and I looked at my reflection in the window. I did not see the scared girl who had handed over her house keys in a moment of weakness. I saw a woman who had fought for her sanctuary, and won. I took the old keys, the ones Arthur had tried to steal from me, and I dropped them into a small metal box, which I buried in the back of the garden. They were no longer keys to my home. They were relics of a past that could no longer hurt me. The air was cool, the house was quiet, and for the first time, I was truly at peace. It was a quiet Tuesday morning, and as I sat on my back porch, I realized that the air felt different, now that it was no longer heavy with the expectation of a frantic phone call or a sudden, aggressive knock at the door. For 28 years, I had been carefully trained to anticipate the needs of others, to apologize for my own existence, and to offer up my hard-won achievements as if they were communal property for the family. But as I watched a single robin meticulously building a nest in the old oak tree, I understood that I was finally done being a supporting character in the long and exhausting drama of Arthur and Lillian. I had received a final report from the bank earlier today, confirming that my mortgage was now completely shielded, and that the unauthorized attempt to access my personal files by Arthur had been officially flagged by the authorities as criminal activity. The realization did not bring me the sharp, jagged anger it once had. Instead, it brought a profound sense of distance, like looking at a storm from a very great height. They were no longer the giants who ruled my world, but small, desperate people who had traded the love of their daughter for a piece of real estate they did not earn. I thought about the words of Samantha Reed, who told me that the greatest victory was not just keeping the house, but keeping my soul intact through the fire. I looked at my hands, the same hands that had worked 60 hours a week to pay for this foundation, and I knew they would never have to shake with fear again. I had built a fortress of peace, not just with bricks and mortar, but with the boundaries I had finally found the courage to set. The silence of the morning was not empty. It was full of possibilities, and for the first time in my life, I was the only one holding the pen. My story was mine to write, and I was going to make sure that the next chapter was beautiful.